Good morning, girls. Today we are going to discuss about exceptions in detail. Actually, yesterday in yesterday's class or the last class, we have seen what an error is and the classification of errors. Like the errors are classified into two types, like runtime errors and compile time errors. So, what comes under compile time errors and what comes under runtime errors? That is what we have seen in the last class. So, in this class, we will try to understand what an exception is actually and how to handle it, how we can handle these exceptions with the tools or with the things which are provided by our Java software. So what is an exception? An exception is a condition that is caused by a runtime error in the program. So generally when this exception arises because of your runtime errors, because of the runtime errors in the program, exception arises. That is what we are seeing here. So when Java interpreter, here we are talking about interpreter, in the compile time errors we are talking about compiler. So the compiler plays a major role. I mean, the compiler itself finds out what the errors were and how to rectify them before creating the .class file itself in the compile time errors. But here we will pass that step until a .class file is created. Here the Java interpreter encounters an error. For example, like dividing an integer by 0, which leads to some infinite values. So it creates an exception object and throws it. It creates an object and throws it. What is the throwing, how to catch that, how to handle it? That is what is the actual procedure of exception handling. So the what does this creation of exception and throwing it mean? It means that if an error has occurred, you try to handle it, you try to um, uh, do something so that the program doesn't end abruptly. Okay, so if the exception object is not caught and handled properly, so that is what we have to catch the exception and handle it properly. If that is not done by the programmer or the user, what happens? The interpreter will display an error message like the one which is seen here, java.lang.arithmetic exception. So if one wants the program to continue with the execution of the remaining code, already I have said you, if you have some 50 lines of code and your runtime error is occurring at some 10th line of the code, your program will end there. I mean, the remaining 40 lines of code is not executed at all. So if you want your program to continue with the execution of these remaining 40 lines of code, you have to handle this exception. That is what we are seeing here. Then we should try to catch the exception object thrown by the error condition and then display an appropriate message. Yes, you have to show the appropriate message, like which type of exception it is and it is occurring in which line. Okay, so that we can correct our errors, our runtime errors, and make the program run smoothly. So this whole procedure is called exception handling. First thing is to find the problem. See, here we are dividing this error handling mechanism into 4 steps. I mean, we can perform this in 4 steps. The first one is find the problem. So where the problem is arising. So you have to find the problem. So that is what is hit the exception. Calling it hit the exception. Second one, inform that an error has occurred. So you have found out the exception. Now you have to inform the user or programmer about the exception. So this is called throw the exception. This is called throwing the exception. These are keywords. It is not used actually. Finding is done generally. Throw, catch are the main keywords used in your exception handling mechanism. So you're informing the person who's handling this program, or you are to that an error has occurred at so and so place, and this is the type of error. So that is throwing the exception. Next, receive the error information. So you have to catch it, because if you don't catch it, it will just throw and come out of the program. If you catch it, then what happens? It will continue with the rest of the program. That is, it will execute the rest of the like 40 lines of the program which is occurring at the after the exception causing line. So receive the error information. So you have to catch that exception. Next, take corrective actions. So you have to rectify the error, or you have to see to that the error is solved, so that in the next execution of the program, again this kind of error doesn't arise. So that is what is your handling the exception. So the error handling code basically consists of two segments. So you can do you can divide this again these four steps into two segments. One is to detect errors and to throw exception. So these two steps will come under one segment too. Finding out the error and throwing that error will come under um, one segment, and catching that error and taking the correct actions, appropriate actions, which are suitable for that particular exception. This will come under the other segment. Okay, so these are the common Java exceptions that you see or that you come across in your programs. So what are they? I will just have a reading of these arithmetic exceptions. So the name itself is suggesting that it is related to the arithmetical operations. So when you are trying to divide a number by zero, or like instead of a equal to operator, you're using double equal to operator, assignment operator. So these will cause these kind of exceptions. Next, array index out of bounds exception. So when you're trying to access an array element which is beyond the size of the array, then it will cause this exception. Next, array store exceptions. When you're trying to store a wrong data type into the other data type or array. Like if you're trying to store a string data type of variable into an integer type of variable array, then it will cause this kind of exceptions. Next, file not found exception. So when you're trying to access as a part of your program, you have to access different files. You have to open those files, close those files. So if you're trying to access a file which doesn't exist, or you can't find the name of the file, then automatically this exception will arise, file not found exception. Next, IO exception caused by general IO failures such as inability to read from a file. So when you want to perform input and output operations like reading the file and writing into the file, when you are unable to do such kind of operations, then this IO exception will arise. Next, null pointer exception, number format exception. So there are different kinds of exceptions. Say that out of memory exception, when there is no enough memory, when you are pointing at a null object. See, when you are trying to convert between strings and numbers, when the conversion is not happening because of some problem, I mean like the size or incorrect data types, then these kind of errors will arise. Next, security exception. So when an applet tries to perform an action not allowed by the browser security settings. So when applet is nothing but a small graphical kind of thing which executes in your program. So if and it is trying to do that, it will try to manipulate the settings of the browser, which is, if the browser doesn't allow you to do so, then it will show this kind of exception, security exception. Next, stack overflow exception. When the stack is full but you're still trying to store some data into it, then it will give rise to this exception. Strings index bound of exceptions, when you're trying to access a non-existent character position in a string. So same like array, you're trying to access a character position which is not, which is not declared, or which is not there in your string, which is beyond the size of your string, but it's still trying to access it, then this type of exception arises. So these are the commonly occurring exceptions in Java. Next, exceptions in Java can be categorized into two types. Again, these exceptions will be will be categorized into two types. What are they? Checked and unchecked exceptions. So what is this checked exceptions? See, explicitly handled in the code itself with the help of try-catch blocks. So when you can handle the exception with this exception handling mechanism, that is try block and catch block. So we will discuss what these try and catch blocks are in detail. So when you're trying to handle, or when you're trying to catch the exception with this try and catch blocks and trying to handle it, so those exceptions are called Java checked exceptions. And these exceptions are extended from this java.lang.exception class. So everything in Java has to be defined in the form of a class. That is what we know. Everything has to be a class and an object, right? So here also the exceptions are every exception that arises. User defined exception or built-in exception. User defined exception or built-in exception. Any exception is a subclass or derived from this main class called exception class, which is part of your lang package. Next, unchecked exceptions. So these exceptions are not essentially handled in the program code. Instead, JVM handles such exceptions. These exceptions are not handled by the code, they are handled by the JVM. So such type of exceptions are called unchecked exceptions. So these are extended from this runtime exception class. So we have two classes basically, exception class and runtime exception class, which are, again you will see here, see which error class, exception class and runtime exception class. These are again all are subclasses of your throwable class. Okay. So exception, in exception again you have runtime exception, and all these come under your checked exceptions, and these are unchecked exceptions, runtime exceptions. Okay. So this runtime exception is a subclass of your exception class, and exception class is your subclass of throwable class. Yeah. So see, what is the major difference in this checked and unchecked exceptions is they are handled. I mean, by whom they are handled. Checked exceptions are handled in the program itself by the try and catch blocks that are within the program code. Unchecked exceptions are handled by the JVM. Java Virtual Machine. So they are called unchecked exceptions. So what is the syntax of your exception handling code? How it looks like? What are the parts of this exception handling code? Uh, this is a very important topic in your exception handling. So see here, you have a diagram which is called try block, and here it is called catch block. So you will enclose the statements which are creating an exception into this block, which is called try block. And if these statements give rise to an exception, then they will be thrown. So it throws a exception object to whom? To the catch block. So this is where you have to write the code which handles this exception. So that is what is your exception handling. So try block, catch block. So this is where your object is created, and this is where the exception is handled. Exception object is created, and this is where the exception is handled. So this is if you remember this block, you can uh, completely understand or write the whole exception handling uh, mechanism. About you can write everything about exception handling mechanism. So try where the object is created, throw it, and then that object is catched by this catch block, and the exception is handled. See, these are the two keywords. These are the two keywords which are very much which are used in handling the exceptions, which play a major role, which have a major role in handling these exceptions. So, what are they? Try and catch. So, try. So, try keyword is used to preface a block of code that is likely to cause an error condition. So, see here the statements. If you have a doubt like this particular statement may cause an exception, so then what you have to do is you have to enclose that statement or statements into a block, so using this curly braces, and put a try keyword here. Okay, so you will group together these statements and put them under a block called try block. Next, and throws an exception. So what this try block does, it will create a object which is causing the exception, because we have a doubt that these statements will cause an exception. So this will generate an exception, and it will create an object and throw it to the catch. Again, we write it here the statements which will process this exception together into a block called catch block. So this is catch is the keyword. Again, try and catch, these two other keywords. So always they should be written in small letters. So catch is the exception, and it has to be thrown. Has to be handled by the. It is thrown by the try block. It has to be handled by the catch block. So see, the catch is added immediately after the try. So where this catch should reside, it should be the very next statement of the try block. So this is how your code looks when you try to put this try uh, when you try to put the statements which cause the exception, which handle the exception under these keywords try and catch. See, the try block can have more than one or more statements that will generate an exception. If any one statement generates an exception, the remaining statements in the block are skipped and the execution jumps to the catch block that is placed next to the try block. So, if you have, say, for 4 statements in this try block, and the second statement is generating an exception, the other two statements which are after the try block will not be executed. So, the whole, you have to treat the try block as a whole. So, where the exception is arising, after that, you can't see the execution of the program. I mean, we will see in the form of the catch block. So, the statements which are after the line which is creating or generating an error, those will be skipped, and the control jumps to the catch block that is placed next to the try block. So the catch block too can have one or more statements that are necessary to process the exceptions. There is no hard and fast rule that you will have only one statement. You can have more than one statement also. So the main thing you have to keep in mind here. So if you are trying to enclose more number of statements in the try block, again it will be the same like a normal program, because where the exception is arising, after that the lines will not be executed. So you should be very much precise in putting the statements that cause or create an exception into the try block. So unnecessarily if you push all the statements in the try block, so again all the statements will be skipped if the error arises or exception arises somewhere in those statements. See, every try statement should be followed by at least one catch statement. So, for every try, there should be a corresponding catch statement. Otherwise, compilation error will occur. So, this is the syntax, of your error handling mechanism, exception handling mechanism. So, when you are writing a program, you have to follow certain rules and regulations. So here it is the rule that you have to put, you have to write a catch block with every try block. If you ignore it, then it will give rise to a compilation error. See, so what is how this catch statement works? It is similar to your method definition. A catch statement is passed a single parameter, which is the reference to the exception object. So see exception type and E. So this is E is the object if the catch parameter matches the type of exception. So you are defining the type of exception also here. In the last table, we have seen different types of exceptions. So exception type is also specified here. So if this E or object exception object which you have thrown is matching this exception type, then the exception is caught and the exception statements in the catch block will be executed. So this should the type of the object should match the exception type or which you have specified in this catch block. Otherwise, the exception is not caught and the default exception handler will cause the execution to terminate. So if this is how you are trying to handle the exception, if this matching of the object with the exception type is not happening, then comes into picture the default exception handler. So this will come into picture and will terminate the program there without continuing the execution of the program. So this is about your try and catch blocks. So let's see the program for this try and catch. See, this is your program. So you have enclosed this statement, which you have the doubt that this may cause an exception. So you have put that statement into a try block. Okay, and immediately after the try block, you have to write a catch block. So you are seeing that this can cause the general sense that these type of statements will cause an arithmetic exception. So you have declared the type of exception as arithmetic exception and you are passing an object which is generated from this try block. So when uh, you are the exception arises, the control will jump from this try statement after creating the object to the catch statement, and this statement will be displayed, and it will continue with this next calculation. Y is equal to A by B plus C, and you can see the output here. See, division by 0 and Y is equal to C. Y is equal to 1. So Y is equal to A. A is 10 and B plus C is also 10. So 10 by 10 is 1. So this two statements are executed. See, even though an exception is arising here, it is handled and it is printed that you are trying to divide something by 0. So that is what is showing the error, and it is not an error. It's trying to tell you that this statement is causing this output, and it is continuing with the execution of these two lines of code. So it is not abruptly ending the program or terminating the program. So it is trying to handle this code. It is executing these two statements and giving you the output as well. This is what we expect or we are trying to do with this exception handling mechanism. Abruptly terminating the program should be avoided, and the rest of the statements which are after this try and catch block also will be executed if the exception is handled properly. The program did not stop at the point of exceptional condition. It catches the error condition, prints the error message, and then continues the execution as if nothing has happened. So this is, there are only two lines here. If you have some other lines of code, like some 50 lines, 100 lines of code, that if nothing or any errors don't occur in that condition, in that lines of code, so the execution of the program continues smoothly. So this is what is your about your exception handling mechanism. So next we will see multiple catch statements. We'll continue this topic in the next class. If you have any doubts, ping me in the group, girls. Have a nice day.